I was sitting in my own living room, staring at the little white pill my husband of 32 years had just handed me with a glass of water, telling me it was my anxiety medication, and something in his eyes, something I had been too afraid to acknowledge for months, made my blood turn to ice in my veins. The way he watched me, not with concern but with this cold, calculating patience, like a scientist observing a lab rat, made every single hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. My hand was shaking as I brought the pill to my lips, and in that split second before it touched my tongue, I made a decision that would save my life. I pretended to swallow it, letting it sit against my cheek while I drank the water, and the moment he turned away, satisfied, I spit it into my palm and slipped it into my pocket. That little white pill, it turned out, wasn't anxiety medication at all. It was an antipsychotic, a drug used to treat schizophrenia and severe mental illness. And my husband, the man who had promised to love and protect me until death do us part, had been systematically poisoning me with it for 7 months, slowly, deliberately, methodically destroying my mind so he could have me declared legally insane and take control of everything I owned. 7 months of him telling me I was losing my memory, that I was becoming paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I needed to see a doctor, that I was getting worse, that maybe I needed to be somewhere I could get help, somewhere safe. 7 months of gaslighting so precise, so cruel, so calculated that I had actually started to believe him, started to question my own sanity, started to wonder if maybe I really was going crazy. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly anticipated in his arrogance and his absolute certainty that I was too stupid, too trusting, too broken to fight back, is that the moment I discovered what he was really doing, something inside me that had been soft and accommodating for 54 years turned to solid steel, and what I did next, the way I turned his own evil plan against him, the way I used his underestimation of me as my greatest weapon, didn't just destroy his scheme, it destroyed his entire life, his reputation, his freedom, and his future. And I recorded every single second of his confession, every word of his conspiracy, every detail of his crime, while he thought I was too far gone with dementia to even understand what was happening. By the time he realized I had been playing him the entire time, that I had been 3 steps ahead of him for months, that the confused, deteriorating woman he thought he was manipulating was actually the director of his downfall, it was far too late. The police already had the recordings, the lawyers already had the evidence, and I already had my freedom back, along with every single thing he tried to steal from me. Before I take you through every calculated move I made, every brilliant trap I set, every moment I watched him dig his own grave deeper while thinking he was winning, if you're someone who believes that mature women deserve respect, that betrayal should have consequences, that intelligence and patience are the most powerful weapons against evil, then subscribe to this channel right now and turn on all notifications. Because what I'm about to share with you isn't just a story of survival, it's a masterclass in strategic revenge, and you won't want to miss a single detail of how I took down a man who thought he could destroy me and get away with it. This channel is dedicated to stories of women over 45 who refuse to be victims, who use their life experience and their underestimated intelligence to serve justice. And I guarantee the revenge I'm about to reveal will restore your faith that evil doesn't always win. Hit subscribe and that notification bell right now, because what comes next is just the beginning. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really started, because you need to understand who I was before he began systematically destroying me, so you can fully comprehend the magnitude of what he tried to do and why what I did to him in return was nothing less than what he deserved. My name is Margaret, and at 54 years old, I had built a life that most people would consider successful by any measure. I owned 3 commercial properties in downtown Portland that I had purchased and renovated over 20 years, properties that now generated substantial rental income every single month. I had inherited a significant portion of land from my father when he passed, land that had been in our family for 4 generations, and was now worth close to $2 million because of development happening in the area. I had a retirement account I had been carefully funding since my 20s, investment portfolios I managed myself because I had always been good with numbers and financial planning, and a home that was entirely in my name, purchased before I even met Richard, my husband. I had worked as a commercial real estate agent for 30 years, building relationships, earning respect in my field, making smart investments with every commission I earned. I wasn't rich by billionaire standards, but I was financially independent, secure, and proud of what I had built through my own intelligence and hard work. Richard came into my life 22 years ago, and he was charming in that quiet, steady way that made you feel safe. He was a middle school teacher, made decent money but nothing spectacular, and from the very beginning, he made it clear he admired my success, my independence, my business acumen. He would tell me how proud he was of me, how impressive my achievements were, how lucky he was to be with such a capable woman. I fell in love with him because he seemed different from other men who were threatened by successful women. He seemed supportive, encouraging, genuinely happy for my accomplishments instead of resentful or competitive. We got married after 2 years of dating, and I kept everything in my name because it was mine before he came along, and he never once complained or suggested otherwise. He signed a prenuptial agreement without hesitation, telling me he understood completely that he would never want me to feel vulnerable or unprotected. That should have been my first clue, looking back now. The fact that he agreed so easily, so quickly, with so little discussion. But I took it as evidence of his character, his integrity, his genuine love for me. I was such a fool. For 20 years, our marriage was, I thought, solid, not passionate or exciting, but comfortable, stable, predictable in a good way. He taught his classes, came home every evening by 4:30, helped around the house, never complained about my work schedule or my business trips, or the time I spent managing my properties. We had a routine that worked. We had separate bank accounts, which I preferred because I had always managed my own money and didn't want to complicate things. He paid for groceries and utilities from his teacher salary. I paid the mortgage and property taxes and everything else from my rental income and investments. It seemed fair, balanced, respectful of both our contributions. We didn't have children, which had been a mutual decision we made early in the relationship because neither of us felt a strong parental calling, and we were both happy focusing on our careers and our life together. I had my work, my properties, my investments, my small circle of close friends. He had his teaching, his summer breaks, his hobbies. We traveled twice a year, nothing extravagant but nice trips to Europe or the Caribbean, always paid for by me because I could afford it, and I enjoyed sharing my success with him. I thought we were happy. I thought we were partners. I thought he loved me. I was wrong about everything. The change started so gradually, so subtly, that I didn't even notice it at first. About 2 years ago, Richard started making little comments about my memory. "Honey, don't you remember we talked about this last week? Are you sure that's what happened? Because I remember it differently. Didn't I tell you I had a meeting tonight? I'm worried you're forgetting things more often lately." At first, I brushed it off as normal aging, the kind of minor memory lapses everyone experiences in their 50s. Maybe I was working too much, stressed about a difficult property renovation, distracted by market changes. I didn't think anything sinister was happening. But the comments increased, became more frequent, more pointed, more concerned. He started writing things down, keeping a little notebook where he documented every time I supposedly forgot something, misplaced something, confused dates or details. He would show me the notebook with this worried expression on his face, this furrowed brow of concern that looked so genuine, I believed it was real. "Margaret, you forgot we had dinner plans with the Johnsons 3 times this month. Margaret, you left the stove on again yesterday, that's the 4th time. Margaret, you accused me of moving your keys when they were in your purse the whole time. Look, I wrote it all down because I'm worried about you, and I think we need to talk to someone professional about this." I started to panic, started to genuinely wonder if something was wrong with my brain, if maybe early onset dementia was creeping in, destroying my cognitive function, stealing my mind piece by piece. The fear was suffocating, absolutely paralyzing, because I had watched my grandmother deteriorate from Alzheimer's, and the thought of that happening to me, of losing myself, of becoming a burden, of having my independence and my identity stripped away, was my absolute worst nightmare. Richard was so supportive during this time, so patient and kind and concerned, or at least that's how he appeared. He suggested I see a doctor, made the appointment himself, drove me there, sat in the waiting room looking worried and loving. The doctor ran tests, cognitive assessments, memory evaluations, brain scans. Everything came back normal, perfectly, completely, totally normal. No signs of dementia, no cognitive decline, no neurological issues whatsoever. The doctor told me I was healthy, that minor memory issues were completely normal for my age and stress level, that I should reduce stress, get more sleep, maybe try meditation. I was relieved, so incredibly relieved I almost cried right there in the doctor's office. but Richard seemed almost disappointed when I told him the results. He kept saying, "Well, maybe we should get a second opinion. Maybe that doctor missed something. Maybe we need to see a specialist." And that's when things escalated to a new level of psychological torture that I still can't think about without feeling physically sick. He started creating situations specifically designed to make me question my sanity. He would move my things, hide my phone or my wallet or important documents, then act concerned and confused when I couldn't find them, suggesting gently that maybe I had misplaced them because of my memory problems. He would tell me we had plans we had never discussed, then get upset when I had no recollection of agreeing to them, implying I was becoming unreliable and unpredictable. He started telling our friends and my business associates that I was struggling with memory issues, planting seeds of doubt about my competence, my reliability, my mental state. I heard through a colleague that Richard had mentioned to several people at a dinner party that he was concerned about me, that I was forgetting important business meetings, that he wasn't sure how much longer I could continue managing my properties alone, that he might need to step in and help me because I was declining. The humiliation of knowing people were talking about me, pitying me, questioning my capability, was almost worse than the fear itself. I started to withdraw socially, avoiding situations where I might forget something or make a mistake that would confirm everyone's suspicions that I was losing my mind. I stopped going to networking events, stopped meeting friends for lunch, stopped participating in community activities I had always enjoyed. I became smaller, quieter, more isolated, exactly what he wanted. Then, about 8 months ago, Richard brought home a bottle of pills. He told me he had spoken to a doctor friend who had recommended something to help with my anxiety and memory issues, something that would make me feel calmer and more focused. The pills were white, small, completely unmarked. He said they were a very mild anti-anxiety medication. Nothing strong, just something to take the edge off and help me relax so my brain could function better. He explained that stress and anxiety can cause memory problems, that if we could reduce my anxiety, my memory would probably improve significantly. It made sense the way he explained it. It sounded reasonable, caring, like he was trying to help me. So I took the first pill, and then I took another one the next day, and another one the day after that. And within 2 weeks, I genuinely started to feel like I was losing my mind for real this time. My thoughts became foggy, cloudy, hard to grasp and hold on to. My coordination got worse. I started stumbling, dropping things, feeling dizzy and disoriented. My speech became slightly slurred at times. Words felt thick and clumsy in my mouth. I would forget what I was saying mid-sentence, lose track of conversations, stare blankly at people who were talking to me, unable to process what they were saying. The fear was no longer theoretical or manipulated. It was absolutely real, visceral, terrifying. I was deteriorating right in front of my own eyes, and I had no idea why the medication that was supposed to help me was making everything so much worse. Richard's response to my decline was perfectly, chillingly calibrated. He was concerned but not surprised. Supportive but increasingly insistent that I needed more help than he could provide at home. He started talking about memory care facilities, about getting me evaluated by a psychiatrist, about the possibility that I might need to be in a supervised environment for my own safety. He showed me brochures for expensive memory care homes, placed them on the kitchen counter where I would see them, talked about how some of them were actually quite nice, how I would be taken care of, how I wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. The subtext was clear. I was becoming incompetent, unable to care for myself, unable to manage my own life, and he was going to need to take over. He started talking to a lawyer about getting power of attorney over my affairs, telling me it was just a precaution, just to make sure all my properties and investments would be properly managed if I became unable to make decisions for myself. He was gentle about it, patient, never angry or forceful, which somehow made it all more insidious. He was positioning himself as my caretaker, my protector, the responsible adult who had to make hard decisions for my own good. And beneath all that concern and care was a plan so evil, so calculated, so absolutely monstrous that when I finally discovered the truth, I could barely breathe from the rage and betrayal. The moment everything changed, the moment the fog in my brain cleared enough for me to see what was really happening, came on a Tuesday morning in March. It was one of those crisp, bright Portland mornings where the light comes through the windows sharp and clear, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so normal, so beautiful, when I felt so broken inside. Richard had left for school early that morning because he had a staff meeting, and I was alone in the house, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the little white pill he had left out for me with a glass of water and a note that said, "Take your medicine, sweetheart. Love you." I was holding the pill, about to put it in my mouth like I had done every single morning for months, when my phone rang. It was my friend Susan, a woman I had known since college, someone I trusted completely, calling to check on me because, she said, she had heard from several people that I wasn't doing well, and she was worried. We talked for a few minutes, and she asked me directly, with real concern and affection in her voice, what was happening to me, what medications I was taking, whether I had gotten multiple medical opinions about my condition. And something about the way she asked, the genuine care in her voice, the implication that maybe, just maybe, what was happening to me wasn't inevitable or natural, made me stop and actually think clearly for the first time in months. I looked down at the pill in my hand, really looked at it, and I asked Susan to hold on for a moment. I walked to Richard's home office, a room he always kept locked, but where I knew he kept a spare key hidden under a bookend on the hallway shelf, and I let myself in. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I knew I needed to find something, anything, that would explain what was happening to me. I went through his desk drawers, careful not to disturb anything so he wouldn't know I had been there, and in the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old teaching materials, I found a file folder. Inside that folder were documents that made my blood run so cold, I thought I might actually pass out right there on his office floor. Medical records showing he had been prescribed antipsychotic medication, supposedly for his own anxiety, from a doctor I had never heard him mention. Printed research articles about the effects of antipsychotic drugs on healthy individuals, how they can cause confusion, memory loss, disorientation, symptoms that mimic dementia and psychosis when given to people who don't actually need them. A handwritten timeline in his writing, detailing when he started giving me the medication, what symptoms I had started showing at what point, notes about increasing the dosage, observations about my cognitive decline, and most horrifying of all, a draft of legal documents transferring power of attorney to him, documents giving him control of all my properties, all my investments, all my assets, documents that were just waiting for the right moment to be signed when I was deemed officially incompetent. There were also emails printed out, communications between Richard and a lawyer discussing the process of having someone declared mentally incompetent, what kind of medical documentation would be needed, how long the process typically took, what rights he would have once the declaration was made. The lawyer had written, quite clearly, that with sufficient medical evidence of cognitive decline and psychiatric instability, it would be relatively straightforward to obtain guardianship, especially if the individual was showing clear signs of being unable to manage their own affairs. I sat there on the floor of his office, holding those documents in my shaking hands, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. The man I had loved for 22 years, the man I had trusted with my life, the man who slept beside me every night and kissed me every morning, had been systematically poisoning me for months with drugs that were destroying my mind, all so he could steal everything I had worked my entire life to build. The betrayal was so massive, so complete, so absolutely soul-destroying that I felt something inside me crack and break apart. But in the midst of that breaking, in the center of that agony, something else emerged, something hard and cold and absolutely focused. I realized with perfect, crystalline clarity that I had been operating under completely wrong assumptions. I had thought this marriage was about love, partnership, mutual respect, shared life. It wasn't. It had never been, at least not for him. This was a long con, a calculated theft, a systematic destruction of another human being for financial gain. And if that was the game we were playing, if that was the reality I was actually living in, then the only rational response was to play the game better than he could ever imagine I was capable of. I took my phone and photographed every single document in that folder, every page, every email, every note, every piece of evidence. My hands were steadier than they had been in months as I did it, and I felt a strange calm settling over me, a focused clarity I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. I carefully put everything back exactly as I had found it, locked his office door, put the key back under the bookend, and walked back to the kitchen. The little white pill was still sitting there on the counter. I picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, and then I did something that would turn out to be the most important decision I would make in this entire ordeal. I didn't take it. Instead, I pretended to swallow it, tilting my head back and drinking the water. Then when I was sure no one could see, I spit it into my hand and threw it in the garbage disposal. And from that moment on, I never took another one of his poison pills. But I made absolutely sure he thought I was taking them, that I was continuing to deteriorate, that his plan was working perfectly, because I realized something crucial. My only advantage now was that he had no idea I knew what he was doing. He thought I was too drugged, too confused, too broken to figure it out, and I was going to use that underestimation, that arrogance, that absolute certainty that he was smarter than me to destroy him completely. I need to stop here and ask you something. Woman to woman, human to human, from someone who has been through the absolute worst betrayal imaginable to someone who might be going through something similar right now. Have you ever trusted someone completely, given them access to every vulnerable part of yourself, only to discover they were using that trust to hurt you, to control you, to destroy you? Have you ever had that moment where you realize that someone you love has been lying to you, manipulating you, gaslighting you, making you question your own sanity and perception of reality? Have you ever felt that specific kind of rage that comes not just from being betrayed, but from being underestimated, from someone assuming you're too stupid or too weak or too broken to fight back? If any part of this story is resonating with you right now, if you're feeling that sick recognition in your stomach, that burning anger mixed with grief, I need you to do something powerful for yourself right now, in this moment. Write in the comments, "My clarity is my power." Just those 5 words, because that's what this moment was for me and what it can be for you. The moment you see clearly, the moment the fog lifts and you understand exactly what's being done to you and why, that's the moment everything changes. That's the moment you stop being a victim and become a force they should have been terrified of all along. When you write those words in the comments, you're not just engaging with a video, you're making a declaration to yourself and to the universe that you're done accepting lies as truth, done accepting manipulation as love, done accepting betrayal as something you just have to endure. And you're helping every other woman who reads through these comments, who is sitting alone at 3 a.m, wondering if she's crazy, wondering if she's overreacting, wondering if what's happening to her is really as bad as it feels, to know that she's not alone, that her instincts are right, that clarity is the first step to power. Write it now. My clarity is my power. Thank you for that declaration. Now let me show you exactly what I did with the clarity I had finally, devastatingly, achieved. The first thing I did, the very first action I took after discovering the truth, was nothing. I did absolutely nothing external, nothing visible, nothing that would alert Richard that anything had changed. I continued my routine exactly as I had been doing, waking up at the same time, moving through my day with the same foggy, confused demeanor I had been displaying for months. When Richard came home from school that Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, staring vaguely at the television, and when he asked how my day was, I mumbled something incoherent about being tired and forgetting what I had been doing. I saw the satisfaction in his eyes, that quick flash of pleasure that he tried to hide, and it took everything in me not to scream, not to throw something at him, not to demand an explanation and scream at him for what he was doing. But I knew that losing control, confronting him, demanding answers would accomplish nothing except alerting him that I knew, and that would ruin everything. Instead, I maintained my performance. I was an actress now, and my role was a woman slowly losing her mind, a woman too confused and deteriorated to notice she was being systematically destroyed. But behind that performance, behind the foggy eyes and slurred speech and apparent confusion, I was operating with more clarity, more focus, more strategic precision than I had ever experienced in my entire life. The terror of the previous months, the fear that I was actually losing my mind, had been replaced with ice-cold purpose. I knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why, and I was going to use that knowledge to take him down so completely, so thoroughly, so publicly that he would never recover. The first real move I made was 3 days after my discovery. Richard had been carefully documenting my decline in his little notebook, showing it to me regularly with fake concern, using it as evidence of my deteriorating condition. I realized that notebook was going to be crucial evidence in his plan to have me declared incompetent, so I needed something to counter it, something that would prove with absolute certainty that I was being drugged against my will, and that my symptoms were artificially induced, not natural decline. I waited until Richard was at work, Then I went to a different doctor, a physician in a practice 40 minutes away in Vancouver where no one knew me or Richard, and I told her everything. I told her my suspicions, showed her the photos I had taken of the documents in his office, explained the symptoms I had been experiencing, and the timeline of when they started. She listened with increasing alarm, took blood samples immediately, and told me she was going to run a full toxicology screen to see what was actually in my system. 3 days later, she called me with results that confirmed everything. My blood showed significant levels of risperidone, a powerful antipsychotic medication used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, medication that should never, absolutely never be given to someone without those conditions, because it can cause exactly the symptoms I had been experiencing: confusion, disorientation, slurred speech, motor control issues, cognitive impairment. The doctor was horrified, told me this was a criminal act, that I needed to go to the police immediately, that what Richard was doing wasn't just morally evil, but legally assault, potentially attempted murder depending on the dosage and duration. But I asked her to wait, to document everything, to keep records, but to wait before reporting it, because I needed more than just medical evidence. I needed his confession, his admission, his own words explaining exactly what he had done and why. I needed evidence so ironclad, so comprehensive, so absolutely damning that there would be no possibility of him talking his way out of it, claiming it was a misunderstanding, hiring a good lawyer, and getting away with destroying me. So I came up with a plan that would require patience, acting ability, and a level of psychological manipulation I had never attempted before in my life. I was going to give Richard exactly what he wanted. I was going to get worse, much worse. I was going to deteriorate so dramatically, so convincingly, that he would become confident enough, comfortable enough, arrogant enough to tell me everything, to explain his whole plan, to confess every detail because he thought I was too far gone to understand or remember. But here's what he didn't know. I was going to be recording every single word. I went to an electronics store in a suburb of Portland where no one knew me, and I paid cash for 3 small, high-quality voice-activated recording devices, the kind that investigators and journalists use. I also bought a small video camera designed to look like a regular household item, the kind of thing used in nanny cams. I set up these devices in strategic locations throughout our house. One in the living room hidden in a bookshelf, one in the kitchen tucked inside a decorative container on the counter, one in our bedroom hidden in my jewelry box. The video camera I placed in the living room, disguised as a regular clock on the mantel. Every single conversation we had in those rooms for the next 3 months would be recorded, every word documented, every interaction captured. But the recording devices were only part of the plan. The bigger part, the part that required real acting skill and psychological strength, was making him believe I was getting worse. Starting the week after I found his documents, I increased my performance significantly. I started calling him by wrong names occasionally, confusing him with his brother or my father or people from decades ago. I would ask him the same question multiple times in an hour, genuinely seeming to forget he had already answered. I started having trouble with basic tasks. I left the refrigerator door open, forgot to turn off the stove, put my keys in bizarre places like the bathroom cabinet or the freezer. I stopped showering regularly, stopped doing my hair, walked around the house in the same clothes for days. I know it sounds extreme, but I needed him to believe I was deteriorating rapidly, moving from mild cognitive impairment into full dementia, because that was the state where he would feel safe enough to talk openly about his plans. And it worked better than I could have hoped. As my performance of deterioration intensified, Richard's behavior changed in ways that were both predictable and absolutely chilling to observe. He became more confident, more open, less careful about hiding his true feelings and intentions. He started talking to me differently, with less pretense of affection and more casual dismissiveness, the way you might talk to a small child or a pet, someone who couldn't really understand or respond meaningfully. He would make comments under his breath, not quite to me, but not quite to himself either. Comments about how much longer this would take, how much more documentation he needed, how soon he could move forward with the legal processes. One night, about 6 weeks into my intensified performance, he actually brought home papers from the lawyer, power of attorney documents that needed my signature, and he tried to get me to sign them while I was in one of my foggy, confused states. I stared at the papers, pretending not to understand what they were, mumbling incoherently, and he got frustrated, impatient, snapping at me that I just needed to sign where he pointed, that it was important, that it would help him take care of things for me. I refused, not directly but through sheer apparent incompetence, unable to hold the pen properly, scribbling nonsense instead of my name, and he finally gave up for that night, but I knew he would try again. That whole interaction was recorded, by the way, both audio and video, his frustration and impatience and the way he spoke to me like I was an annoying obstacle rather than a human being he supposedly loved. But the breakthrough, the moment I had been waiting for and working toward for months, came on a Sunday afternoon in May. Richard had a few drinks that afternoon, which he rarely did, just enough to lower his inhibitions slightly, make him a bit more talkative, a bit less guarded. We were sitting in the living room, me in my usual spot on the couch looking vague and disconnected, him in his chair reading something on his tablet, and I started one of my confused, rambling monologues about nothing in particular, the kind of thing I had been doing regularly to maintain my character. I was talking about something that had happened decades ago, confusing people and places and times, and then I said something that I knew would trigger him. I mentioned my properties, asked him in a confused, childlike way what was going to happen to my buildings, whether someone would take care of them when I couldn't anymore, and that was the opening he had been waiting for. He put down his tablet, looked at me with this mixture of condescension and something that might have been pity, but felt more like contempt, and he started talking. "Margaret," he said, his voice taking on that patient, explanatory tone you use with someone very simple, "you don't need to worry about your properties anymore. I'm going to take care of all of that for you. You can't manage them yourself. You're too confused, too sick, and it's not safe for you to be making financial decisions or dealing with tenants or any of that anymore. I'm going to handle everything, and you're going to be taken care of. You don't have to stress about any of it." I nodded slowly, trying to look grateful but confused, and asked him how he was going to do that, how that worked. And then, sitting there in our living room with that video camera recording every word and every facial expression, he explained his entire plan to me in detail, because he was absolutely convinced I was too demented to understand or remember any of it. He told me that he had been working with a lawyer for over a year, planning how to get control of my assets legally and permanently. He explained that the first step had been to establish that I was mentally incompetent, which required documentation of cognitive decline and medical evidence of mental illness. That's why he had started giving me the medication, he said, because it would make me actually show symptoms of dementia and psychosis that doctors would have to acknowledge and document. He said he had researched carefully what medications would create the most convincing symptoms without being immediately life-threatening, because he needed me alive, but incapacitated, at least for a while. He told me that once he had enough medical documentation of my decline, he would file for guardianship and power of attorney, showing that I could no longer manage my own affairs, and that as my husband, he was the appropriate person to take control. He explained that once he had legal control, he would transfer all my properties into his name, liquidate my investment accounts, and eventually, probably within a year or two, have me committed to a long-term memory care facility where I would spend the rest of my life while he lived off the money from my assets. He even had a specific facility picked out, he told me, one that was expensive but very secure, meaning it would be difficult for me to leave or for anyone to visit me without his permission, meaning I would be effectively imprisoned there until I died. And then he said something that I will never forget as long as I live, something so cruel and so casually evil that I had to use every ounce of self-control not to break character and react. He said, "I know this might seem harsh, Margaret, but you have to understand, you're not really using your mind anymore anyway, and those properties and that money are just sitting there. I've given 22 years of my life to you, supported your career, been patient with your obsession with work and money, and I deserve something for all that time and effort. This way, you'll be taken care of, you'll be safe, and I'll finally have the financial security and freedom I should have had all along. You're basically already gone, Margaret. This is just making the practical arrangements for what's already reality." The lack of guilt in his voice, the calm reasonableness with which he explained destroying my life and imprisoning me in a memory care facility while he spent my money, was so staggering that I almost couldn't process it. I kept my face blank, confused, nodding along like I was trying to understand something too complicated for my deteriorated brain to grasp, and I asked him, in a small, childlike voice, if he ever loved me at all, if any of it was real, and he laughed, actually laughed, this short, bitter sound. and said, "I married you because you were successful and stable, and I thought we could have a good life together. I didn't expect you to be so controlling with your money, so determined to keep everything separate and in your name. I thought marriage meant sharing everything, but you made it very clear that what was yours, and I was just along for the ride. So yes, I stayed with you. I played the supportive husband, and now I'm taking what I should have had access to all along. I'm not the bad guy here, Margaret. You made me do this by being so selfish with money you'll never be able to use or enjoy anyway." That statement, that justification where he framed himself as the victim and me as the selfish villain in his story, was so twisted, so fundamentally morally bankrupt that I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just nodded, looked away, mumbled something incoherent, and let him think he had explained everything to a woman who wouldn't remember the conversation in 5 minutes. He patted my hand, told me to rest, and went back to his tablet, satisfied that he had unburdened himself to someone who couldn't possibly use the information against him. But every single word he had said, every detail of his plan, every casual admission of his crimes had been recorded in high-definition audio and video. I had exactly what I needed. If you're watching this story unfold and you're feeling that deep satisfaction of knowing that this evil man is about to get exactly what he deserves, if you're experiencing that vindication of seeing someone who hurt and betrayed another person so cruelly about to face consequences, hit that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that this story matters, that it needs to be seen by more people, especially women who need to know that betrayal and abuse don't have to be the end of your story, that intelligence and patience and strategic planning can defeat even the most calculated evil. Like this video right now, because stories like mine, stories where the underestimated woman doesn't just survive, but completely dominates, need to be shared widely. Stories where justice is served cold and complete need to be celebrated. Hit that like button right now, and then stay with me, because the next part, where I execute my revenge and he realizes far too late what I've done, is the most satisfying part of all. The day after Richard's confession, I took all the recordings, all the photographs of his documents, all the medical evidence from my doctor, and I went to the police. Not to the local precinct where Richard might have connections or where officers might know him from his teaching job, but to the district attorney's office in downtown Portland, where I requested to speak with someone from the domestic violence unit. I brought everything: a flash drive with all the audio and video recordings, printed transcripts I had made of the most damning conversations, the photographs of the documents from his office showing his research and planning, the medical records showing the medication in my system, and the doctor's testimony about what those medications do to healthy individuals, bank statements showing the separate accounts and establishing that all the assets he was trying to steal were solely mine. I sat across from a detective named Sarah Chen and a district attorney named Michael Torres, and I told them everything, showed them everything, walked them through the entire timeline from the first comment about my memory to Richard's full confession captured on video. The detective's face got harder and more angry as I presented the evidence, and the district attorney actually said, out loud, that this was one of the most calculated and cruel cases of domestic abuse and attempted theft he had seen in his career. They told me that what Richard had done constituted multiple serious crimes. Drugging someone without their knowledge or consent is assault, and potentially attempted murder depending on dosage and intent, fraud, coercion, attempted theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and several other charges that could carry decades of prison time. They asked me if I was in immediate danger, whether I needed protection, whether I wanted to press charges immediately. And I told them yes, I wanted to press charges. I wanted him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, but I asked them to wait exactly 1 week before arresting him. I had one more thing I needed to do first. During that week, while Richard thought everything was proceeding according to his plan, while he continued giving me sugar pills that he thought were antipsychotics because I had switched them out weeks ago, while he continued treating me like a demented child whose life he was generously managing, I was systematically, carefully, thoroughly protecting every single asset I owned. I met with my own lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia who specialized in asset protection and estate planning, and I showed her everything. We created an irrevocable trust, transferred all my properties into that trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary, ensuring that no one, not Richard or any guardian or court, could access or control those properties. We moved all my investments and retirement accounts into new accounts at different institutions with enhanced security and protection protocols. We drafted a comprehensive power of attorney document that specifically excluded Richard from ever having any authority over my medical, financial, or personal decisions, and we had it notarized and filed with the court immediately. We also prepared a restraining order that would be filed the same day as his arrest, prohibiting him from contacting me or coming anywhere near me or my properties. Every single legal protection we could think of, we put in place. By the time that week was over, Richard had exactly zero legal claim or access to anything I owned, and there was no possible legal mechanism he could use to get it. Everything he had spent over a year planning, all his careful manipulation and documentation and drugging and gaslighting, had accomplished absolutely nothing except generating evidence of his own crimes. On the morning of Richard's arrest, I was not home. My lawyer had arranged for me to stay in a hotel under a false name, with a security detail, because we didn't know how Richard would react when he realized what was happening. The police arrived at our house at 6 a.m. with a warrant for his arrest on multiple felony charges. According to the police report I read later, Richard was completely shocked, confused, insisting there was some mistake, that his wife was severely mentally ill, and this was some confused delusion she was having. He actually told the officers they needed to understand that I had dementia, that I wasn't competent to make accusations or file charges, that he was my caretaker, and this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The officers, who had been thoroughly briefed on the case and had watched the video of Richard's confession, informed him that I was completely mentally competent, that I had extensive medical documentation proving I had been drugged against my will, and that they had recordings of him admitting to every crime he was being charged with. The detective told me later that the look on Richard's face when he realized I had been playing him, that I had been recording everything, that the confused, demented woman he thought he was manipulating had actually been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time, was something she would never forget. He kept saying, but she couldn't. She was too confused. She didn't understand what was happening. How could she have? And the detective said, quite coldly, that I was significantly more intelligent and capable than he had ever given me credit for, and that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of his life. Richard was arrested, charged with multiple felonies, and held on significant bail because of the flight risk and the severity of the charges. The bail was set at $300,000, which he couldn't pay because all his assets combined totaled maybe $50,000 in his teacher retirement account, and he certainly wasn't getting any money from me. He called me from jail exactly once. I suppose they allowed him one phone call, and I answered because I wanted to hear what he would possibly have to say. His voice was different, smaller, scared, and he started with Margaret. Please, we need to talk about this. I think you're confused about what was really happening, and I cut him off. I told him, in a voice so calm and cold it surprised even me, that I had never been confused, not for a single moment after I discovered his plan. I told him I had every recording, every document, every piece of evidence of his crimes, and that I would be testifying against him at trial with pleasure. I told him that every single asset he tried to steal was protected, and he would never touch them, that I had secured everything legally and financially in ways he couldn't undo. I told him that I had also informed his school district about the charges, and they had immediately suspended him without pay pending investigation, meaning his teaching career was over regardless of the trial outcome, because no school would ever hire him again with these kinds of charges. I told him that I had sent documentation of what he did to several of our mutual friends and his family members, people he cared about impressing, because I wanted everyone who knew him to understand exactly what kind of person he really was. And then I told him that I hoped he spent decades in prison thinking about how he destroyed his entire life, trying to steal from someone who had actually loved him, someone who would have shared everything with him willingly if he had just been honest and patient, and that the supreme irony of his situation was that his greed and evil had cost him everything he wanted and more. Then I hung up. He tried to call back multiple times over the next few days, but I blocked the number. I had nothing more to say to him. The criminal trial took 8 months to finally happen, because Richard kept trying to delay, kept firing and hiring new lawyers, kept trying to find some legal strategy that would work. His defense was pathetic, predictable, and insulting. He claimed that I was the one who was mentally unstable, that I had manipulated evidence, that the recordings were taken out of context, that he had been trying to help me, and I had misunderstood his intentions. But the evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, impossible to explain away. The jury saw the video of him explaining his entire plan in detail, heard the audio of him admitting he had been drugging me intentionally to make me seem incompetent so he could steal my assets. They heard medical experts testify about what risperidone does to healthy individuals and confirmed that I had significant levels of it in my system, despite having no prescription or medical need for it. They heard my doctor testify that my symptoms disappeared completely within 3 weeks of stopping the medication, proving conclusively that my decline was artificial and induced. They saw the documents from his office showing his research and planning, the timeline he had created, the emails with his lawyer. The defense had absolutely nothing credible to counter any of it. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before coming back with guilty verdicts on every single charge: assault with a deadly weapon, the medication being classified as a weapon, fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy, coercion, and several other charges I don't even remember all the names of. The judge, an older woman who had clearly seen a lot of terrible things in her career, said at sentencing that Richard's crimes represented a profound betrayal of trust and a calculated cruelty that warranted the maximum sentence allowed by law. She sentenced him to 18 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 12 years. 18 years. He would be 73 years old before he could even apply for parole, and given his crimes and the lack of any genuine remorse or accountability, parole was unlikely. His teaching career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His family had mostly disowned him after learning what he did, and he lost everything trying to steal from me, which felt like the most poetic justice imaginable. But the criminal trial wasn't the end. I also filed a civil lawsuit against Richard for damages, pain and suffering, emotional distress, medical expenses, legal fees, and punitive damages. Since he was already in prison and had no assets, I knew I would probably never collect any money from him, but I wanted the judgment on record, wanted the legal acknowledgement of what he had done to me and what he owed me for it. The civil court awarded me over $2 million in damages, a judgment that will follow him for the rest of his life, garnishing any income he ever makes, ensuring that even if he somehow gets out of prison someday, he will never have financial security or stability again. I also made sure that the court issued a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact between us for the rest of our lives, meaning if he ever tries to reach out to me again, even after he gets out of prison, he goes right back to jail. He is erased from my life permanently, legally, completely. Now, let me tell you where I am today, almost 2 years after this nightmare finally ended. I'm sitting in my home, the home that is still entirely mine, drinking coffee on a Tuesday morning, and I'm free in a way I didn't even know was possible. The properties Richard tried to steal are still mine, still generating income every month, still appreciating in value. The investments he tried to take are still mine, growing steadily, securing my future. Everything I built over decades of work is still exactly where it should be, in my control, in my name, protected and safe. But more than the financial security, more than keeping what was rightfully mine, I got something back that's infinitely more valuable: myself. In the months after Richard was arrested and I stopped taking the medication he had been giving me, the fog lifted completely. My mind cleared, my memory sharpened, my cognitive function returned to normal. I realized how much of my confusion and deterioration had been artificial, chemically induced, not real at all. The woman I thought I was losing, the competent, intelligent, capable person I was terrified was disappearing. She was still there the whole time, just temporarily obscured by drugs I never should have been taking. Getting her back, getting myself back, was like being reborn. I've rebuilt my social life, reconnected with friends who had pulled away when they thought I was losing my mind, formed new relationships with people who know the whole story and respect what I survived and how I fought back. I've started traveling again, taking trips I had stopped taking when Richard was isolating me and making me afraid of my own incompetence. I went to Italy last spring and spent 3 weeks just wandering around Florence and Rome, reminding myself that I'm capable of navigating foreign countries and managing logistics and living independently in the world. I've gotten more involved in community work, specifically with domestic violence organizations and elder abuse prevention programs, sharing my story to help other women recognize warning signs and understand their options. I've spoken at several conferences about financial abuse and coercive control in relationships, and every time I share what happened to me and how I fought back, Women come up to me afterwards and tell me they recognized something in their own relationships, that my story gave them clarity or courage or hope. That feels more meaningful than any amount of money or any professional achievement I ever had. I haven't dated anyone since Richard, and I'm not sure I will again. Not because I'm afraid or traumatized or unable to trust, but because I've discovered I genuinely enjoy being alone, being completely autonomous, not having to consider anyone else's needs or wants or feelings in my daily life. I wake up when I want to wake up. I eat what I want to eat. I spend my time exactly how I choose to spend it. I'm not lonely. I'm not isolated. I have friends and family and community, but I'm also gloriously, peacefully independent in a way I never was during my marriage. Maybe I'll change my mind someday. Maybe I'll meet someone who adds value to my life rather than trying to subtract from it. But right now, I'm completely content with just me, myself, and the life I've built and protected. As for Richard, I don't think about him much anymore, unless I'm telling this story. He's not relevant to my life, not a factor in my decisions, not someone I have feelings about one way or another. He's simply a person who made terrible choices and is experiencing the natural consequences of those choices. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's tried to appeal his conviction multiple times and been denied every time because the evidence was so overwhelming. I heard he's trying to write a book about his experience, positioning himself somehow as a victim of the justice system or a misunderstood husband, but no publisher will touch it because the trial was so public and the evidence of his guilt so clear that it would be legal and reputational suicide to publish anything sympathetic to him. He's alone in prison, probably will be for another decade at least, and then he'll be an old man with no money, no career, no family, no friends, no reputation, nothing. He gambled everything on destroying me and stealing what I had built, and he lost everything in the process. That's not my revenge on him. That's just the natural consequence of his own actions catching up to him. I didn't destroy his life. He destroyed his own life by trying to destroy mine. Now I want to talk directly to you, whoever you are watching this right now. If you're a woman who is being controlled, manipulated, gaslit, abused, diminished, undermined, or betrayed by someone you trusted, I need you to hear this clearly. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not imagining things. Your instincts are right, and you have more power than they want you to know you have. The person who is hurting you is counting on your confusion, your self-doubt, your conditioning to be nice and understanding and forgiving, your fear of being alone or judged or seen as difficult. They are counting on you to accept their version of reality instead of trusting your own perceptions and experiences. But the moment you see clearly what's really happening, the moment you trust yourself more than you trust their lies, that's the moment everything shifts. You don't have to stay in situations that diminish you. You don't have to accept treatment that hurts you. You don't have to keep giving chances to people who use those chances to hurt you more. And you are never, ever too old, too late, or too far into a situation to change it. I was 54 years old, married for over 2 decades, being systematically poisoned and gaslit, and I still found a way to fight back and win. If I could do it in that situation, you can do it in yours, whatever yours looks like. Being mature, being over 45 or 50 or 60, is not a weakness in situations like this. It's actually your greatest advantage. You have decades of experience reading people, decades of accumulated knowledge and resources and connections, decades of learning patience and strategy, and you have the freedom that comes with age of simply not caring anymore what people think about you, or whether you're liked or approved of. Use those advantages. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself legally and financially before you make any moves. Get evidence that can't be disputed. Build a case so strong that there's no room for he said, she said ambiguity. And then execute your plan with cold precision and zero guilt, because protecting yourself from people who are hurting you is never something you should feel guilty about. You deserve safety. You deserve respect. You deserve to be treated like a human being with value and rights and dignity. And if the people in your life aren't treating you that way, you have every right, morally and legally, to remove them from your life and protect everything you've built. You don't owe them understanding or patience or more chances. You owe yourself protection and peace and freedom from abuse. I'm not special. I'm not unusually strong or brave or smart. I'm just a woman who reached a point where the fear of staying became worse than the fear of leaving, where protecting myself became more important than protecting someone else's feelings, or keeping up appearances, or avoiding conflict. That moment can come for you too. It can come today if you let it. The life you deserve, the peace you're entitled to, the freedom you've been denying yourself, all of it is waiting for you on the other side of the decision to choose yourself over people who hurt you. Make that decision. Choose yourself. Trust yourself. Fight for yourself. You're worth fighting for. If this story moved you, challenged you, inspired you, or gave you ideas about your own life and what you might need to do to protect yourself, I need you to do 3 things right now before you click away from this video. First, like this video right now. Hit that thumbs up button so the algorithm shows this story to more women who desperately need to see it. Women who are being manipulated or abused or gaslit right now and need to know they're not crazy and they have options. You're literally help save lives by making this content discoverable. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications, every single one of them, because next week I'm sharing the story of a 58-year-old woman whose adult children tried to have her declared incompetent so they could take her inheritance early, and what she did when she found out involved a private investigator, a carefully orchestrated family dinner, and a reading of a will that left everyone except her in absolute shock. You will not want to miss it. And third, most important, comment below right now and tell me, what was your moment of clarity? What was the thing that happened that made you finally see clearly what was really going on in your relationship or your family or your life? Share your story, even if it's just one sentence, because your voice matters, your experience matters, and there are thousands of women reading through these comments looking for solidarity and validation and permission to trust their own perceptions. Share your moment right now. I read every single comment, and so do the other women in this community who come here looking for strength. Do all 3 things now, and I'll see you next week with another story of a woman who refused to be destroyed. Thank you for spending this time with me today, for trusting me with your attention and your emotions. Now go take back your power. You deserve it.